Hello, all. Today on Let's Talk Real Estate USA, we have Kyle Jasey of Jasey Capital Group. Before we move forward, remember to hit that like and subscribe button for more of our weekly content. So, Kyle and I cover all things hard money loans, from their sources to how to find deals, networking, and even walk through a few hypothetical deals. Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Real Estate USA. And today we have Kyle Jasey of Jasey Capital Group, and we're talking hard money and investing. So, welcome, Kyle. How are you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Great. So, let's get going. So, Kyle, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. I got into real estate probably about 10 years ago at this point, 9 or 10 years ago. I originally started working for a buddy of mine's title insurance company. I just didn't really love title that much, but I liked real estate as an industry. And so I had an opportunity to go and work for a small hedge fund that was doing some real estate lending, hard money lending, for people looking to, fix and flip or buy and hold properties. And so I started doing that. I eventually went to go work for one of the competitors, and then I eventually went off on my own, and I've kind of been doing that ever since. And so initially I was just brokering loans to different lenders, kind of trying to figure out what were the best options for people. And then probably, 4 or 5 years ago, I started my own shop and just, started kind of doing it on my own with my partners now.
So, what was like the impetus for you deciding you wanted to go out on your own?
I've always been an entrepreneur, so for me, it's more natural to be out on my own working than working for someone else, and so it just seemed like the right move for me at the time, um, and yeah, I don't know.
Awesome.
It occurred to me at one point that maybe I wasn't the world's greatest employee, and maybe I should just figure out how to do it on my own.
That's, that is one of the main reasons, actually, that I've left teaching, that I left all these jobs that I was the employee.
Yeah,
Because without fail, I would walk into a room and I would take over. But that was a problem when I walked into the room with the principal and I took over.
yeah. Yeah, and you look at it and you're like, well, the common denominator here seems to be me. So, yeah. Good thing
Sooner or
to do
later,
yourself.
can't really deny your nature, is what I've discovered.
Yeah.
So, what is it about real estate that had you so interested? Or is it that you were kind of like going around trying to find a career? That was very much me, that I was like moving around to different careers. But
Yeah.
why real estate for you?
Probably the smart thing for me to say here is how much I love real estate and that sort of thing. But for me, it was more just something that I could kind of, you know, that made sense. It was a real industry. In the past, companies I've started, it was kind of like I'd have an idea or something like that, and then you have to try to create a market for that. And it's a great pursuit, but it's also really difficult, because you're trying to do two things, right? You're trying to convince the world that what you're selling is the best or is worth them buying, and then on top of that, you're also trying to be successful at business. And so with real estate, it was kind of like, all right, here's something concrete, and if I just work hard and I learn, about the products that I'm offering, that sort of thing, it's like I know that demand is already there. And so it was kind of something that I found myself in, and I needed to get serious. I needed something. I'd just gotten married around that time, and it made sense. And so I'm not, I like the enthusiasm of my clients, and I like to see other people get excited about it. For me, I don't care that much about tile patterns and that kind of thing, but I can appreciate other people's enthusiasm, and I do like to be a part of people's journey as they build their businesses, and to see people, like, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing someone get to a point when they can quit their job and just do this thing that they love full time, and to play some sort of a part in that is really, really cool.
So your company, where do you primarily do most of your work? And is it like all around? Is it hyper local? What do you do?
Yeah, it's pretty local. I mean, we get most of our business through either referrals or people that we meet through networking. And so we run a bunch of networking events, and that's how you and I met. So we run 5 networking events. Excuse me. I mean, they haven't been going as much. We're kind of just starting to bring them back post-COVID. It's nice. It's been nice to get out and see people again. But so most of the deals we do are within that geographical footprint. So, the events are all in New York and New Jersey, but we do a fair amount of business in Pennsylvania. We do some business in Florida. But, every now and then we'll get like a deal in Ohio or something like that. But for the most part, it's in the areas where we're actually present.
Yeah. And what is normally, I don't really know the correct term, what's the average amount that you're lending at? Is it 500,000? Is it millions? What is the ballpark average?
I'd say the average loan size is probably around 300,000.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. This is probably something I should know, but I would guess probably around 300,000. When you average them all out.
Mm-hmm. And what do you specialize in?
I would say most of the business that we do, and we can do larger stuff, we can do larger commercial and that kind of thing in mixed use. Most of what we do is like 1 to 4 family homes. And it's people that are either buying them, fixing them up, and selling them, or buying them, fixing them up, renting them out, and then refinancing. So most of what we're doing is in that space. But occasionally we do other stuff too. But that's also where most of the deals are as well. There's just more of those types of properties.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we chatted previously about where this money comes from, because I always love knowing what I would call the plumbing of the financial system. Yeah. And so people talk about, hard money lenders and all this stuff, but where do you get your money to lend out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I guess I'll kind of answer that a couple different ways. So, we are funded through a partnership with a hedge fund. So the vast majority of the deals that we do are just, in partnership with the fund. It's a combination of our money and the fund's money, mostly the fund's money. Hard money is interesting in the way that 10 years ago it was a very different industry. I guess when I got into it, it was just starting to change. And so at that time, it was much more like, you have a wealthy uncle, a wealthy aunt, or someone like that. You want to flip houses. You go and convince them. They put some money behind you. Or maybe just, it was generally individuals lending out their own money. And the problem with that was that, their money was generally not infinite. And so eventually they'd run out. And so, when I first got into this industry, it was a big problem with people that were just kind of using, individuals at that time. It would just be like, we would just get phone calls that were like, hey, my guy ran out of money. Do you think that, it's like, and it was a very common problem. And so now it's become more institutional, and hedge funds have gotten involved and that sort of thing. And so a couple of the good things about that is the money's more reliable. It's more available. You don't have to worry as much about us running out of money, that sort of thing. And it's also driven the prices down. So when I first got into this, a lot of lenders were at 14 and 4, and now you'll see rates, in the 8s, and maybe just a point on it or something like that, maybe even lower.
What do you mean by 14 and 4?
So 14% annualized interest and 4 points. So the points are paid at closing. So generally with hard money loans, there's no prepayment penalty. Not always, but at least for the most part. And so the points are charged at closing from the lender's perspective, so the lender can be assured that at least they're going to make some money.
So is that what points are? It's to make sure that you make money.
Yeah. Look, it's probably another way to make money, but the way I view it is that. And so for me, I never spend any time worrying about, sometimes I get people that say, look, I'm just going to borrow the money for a month and I'm going to pay it off. I don't spend any time worrying about that. I say, okay, as long as I'm making enough on the points that it's worth the effort, then, sure, and then everything else is kind of gravy.
So, two things. Can we back up to, you said that the industry has changed. What do you think drove the change of the industry? It seems a lot of change happened after the 2008 recession.
Yeah, but I
Maybe
think
it's just ballpark timing, but it seems like quite a few of the industries I've been interviewing, that seemed to be the time that a bunch of different things changed.
yeah,
So,
I
what do you
mean,
think drove this?
like this is probably a little bit above my pay grade, but I'm happy to speculate. I don't think it was. I don't know that it was necessarily caused by that. I mean, maybe people on Wall Street were looking for more opportunities, and they were kind of in the place of trying to find something new. And then this is, it's like I don't even know the size of it now, but last I heard, it's like a $40 billion industry. The house flipping, real estate investing industry. And so, I think it was just kind of, the timing just played out the way that it did. I haven't heard anything about 2008, but you could very well be right. I don't know. But I think it was just kind of seen as, hey, these are like asset-backed loans, and they're actually super safe. It's like one of the interesting things when I first got into the industry. I spent some time just kind of, talking to different lenders and getting a sense for I guess how these loans typically play out. And one of the things I found shocking just in the different lenders I spoke to was that, almost none of these lenders were ever losing money on deals, And so it was like, well, wait, how often, do people default? How often do you take a loss? And it was just like, I got a lot of yeah, we've never lost money on one. And so, obviously that's going to change as people take more risk and that sort of thing. But it was just like, I can see why this space was so attractive, because generally speaking, as long as you do smart loans and, you don't overextend, it's fairly safe, So.
Can we talk about how you underwrite a loan?
Sure. So generally speaking, someone will call me with a deal, and I'll want to hear the numbers. Usually the first thing I ask for is just like, okay, what do the numbers look like? What are you buying it for? How much are you putting into it? And then what do you think you can sell it for, right? And so in general, just kind of like back of the envelope, I'm usually looking for the purchase plus the rehab to not exceed 75% of the end value. So just to put it into numbers, let's just say if you're going to sell it for $1 million, I want the purchase plus the rehab to be less than or equal to $750,000. So usually if there's about a 25% spread, you're kind of okay, And so then so if the numbers make sense, that's the first thing. Because if the numbers don't make sense, then it's like, well, what are we doing here? And there are some deals like, let's say, if your plan is to keep the property, for rental income, then it's like, oh, okay, well, that's a little bit different. Now you're going to be making your money over time. So yeah, maybe there's not going to be a big spread there, but you're not trying to flip it anyway. You're trying to make your money, over the next 20, 30 years, So those deals we can, they can be a little bit tighter. Other things I look for is experience. Experience is like the biggest one with people. And so, if you have no experience, we're not going to do as heavy of a rehab. Generally speaking, we're probably not going to lend you more than like $75,000. If you're a general contractor, but you haven't done anything on your own, obviously it's a little bit different, But so we look at the experience. We'll also want to see that you've done something of comparable size. So let's say you've done 2 or 3 projects, but on this one you're looking, they've all been $50,000, $60,000 renovations. Excuse me. And now on this one you're looking to do a $200,000 add a level or something like that. A deal like that, we're going to look at a lot more closely. We're going to say, well, what makes you think you can pull this off? And generally with lenders usually don't want to be the first one to fund someone to do something, which understandably kind of upsets real estate investors because they're like, well, how am I supposed to get the experience if you won't fund it? And it's like, yeah, we're not in the fairness business.
22, but
right. Yeah, so, that can be tough. And it's like with ground ups, excuse me, we generally want to see that you've completed 3 ground ups before we'll fund one. But yeah, so we look at the experience. We want to see that you've done something of comparable size. So it's not like a huge stretch that makes sense. We want to make sure that the profitability is there. We also look at your credit. We look at your background. Obviously, we don't want to see a lot of foreclosures or bankruptcies or anything like that. I mean, generally, we want to see credit be good. Credit doesn't have to be amazing. If it's over 650, there's really like no questions for the most part. If it's under 650, then it's kind of like, well, how much under? What's on there? Why is it lower? That sort of thing. But it also depends on what you're trying to do. If your plan is to keep the property, then it's like, okay, well, then we want to see your credit be high enough to get one of these loans. Your credit's going to be over 670, 680. So, I mean, it's mostly like kind of common sense stuff, and I would say generally speaking, like one thing I tell people is like, as a lender, we're your partner here and we want to see you have success. And it's like,
if they're successful, you'll be successful.
Yeah. And sometimes people get caught up and they're like, well, I mean, this is a great deal. So like, maybe the lender just wants to take the property back. And it's like, there are some lenders that are not really set up for repeat business and you got to be careful. You can usually figure out that if you Google them and read the reviews. But for the most part, it's like, with us, we make our money on the comeback, like we want the repeat business. We're never trying to hit it out of the park with any one deal.
Mm-hmm. So question, what happens when an investor can't pay? What happens if in a year they come back and they're like, we've run out of money, or they got it halfway through the renovation, realized they needed $100,000 more, or they got a year in and they can't sell the dang thing?
So I guess it depends on the circumstance. I'll break down the different things you said, right? So if they've run out of money, like let's say mid-rehab or something, they've run out, well then, the first suggestion would be, can you raise money from someone else? Because one thing that we really don't do is we really don't amend like the loan amounts. It's like what it is what it is. And we're not lending more money, unfortunately. But it's just, we have partners and we kind of have to stick to what we agree to. And so in that case, what I would suggest to the person is, friends, family, bring on a partner, or anything like that, which does happen. I mean, people have run out of money and they have run on partners and gotten it done that way. If the project is done and they're unable to sell, and obviously you know better than I do, cut the price, do these different things. But if it really doesn't work, then what I would suggest is, can you rent it out? If you can rent it out, then let's do a refinance. Let's get some renters in there, and maybe you can sell it down the road, or maybe you keep it as a good investment. So there are things that people can do. Really, where I see people getting stuck, and I think you're going to ask me at some point about, just deals I've seen, worse deals, and just to kind of get into that. Usually these deals go fairly smoothly, right? But in the last couple of years with COVID, I've seen a number of deals where people have purchased the properties and they've had tenants inside, and because of the eviction moratoriums, they were unable to get the tenants out. And so that is, it wasn't even something that any of us had on our radar that that's the kind of thing that can happen, but it did. And, in those cases, we're understanding, especially if they're continuing to make their payments, but there's not a lot that can be done, fortunately. And so that's kind of a crazy scenario that was, again, something that none of us really anticipated. But for the most part, people are able to get out of these deals. And even if you get caught mid-construction, then one of your best bets is just to take a small loss or break even and sell it to another investor. Just get out. Get out. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. The worst thing that people do is to go silent, And so I always, when deals go sideways like that, I always try to keep it as friendly as possible, and I try to say, look, we understand things happen, you're doing everything you can, but let's try to figure out a solution there,
Mm-hmm. How many deals on average? So I kind of want to talk about starting up your company, because you've gone through the process of starting up your company. One thing I always love asking guests is myths to be busted. One of the myths being, like, starting in real estate, it's not easy. People think, oh, I got my license, yada, yada, yada. 90% of agents crash out within 2 years.
Right.
because they're just like, oh, it's simple getting in. And I was like, yeah, it cost 500 to do this, really 1,000 to do that, but I spent 5,000 my first year, but I made 50. But there's a myth that it's like, oh, just a couple $100 you can start your company. So I'm kind of curious, from your side, how did that work for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I've never focused on the cost of it so much. I mean, because like the lending side of things, it's probably not as costly as the real estate investing side of things. But I mean, I think with any new venture like this, it's just the time you're gonna have to put in. It's so much work. And like I used to always say, like the best thing about real estate investing is that there's no barrier to entry, and the worst thing about real estate investing is that there's no barrier to entry. It's just like everybody and their brothers, and it's really tough. And like one of the things I usually tell people is, it's like, yeah, look, you gotta get an LLC, you gotta do some of that stuff. Usually when people call me, I'm like, yeah, form the LLC now, don't form it now, I don't care. Like that takes a day, 2 days.
Yeah.
You do it yourself, your accountant, it's like $150 or something. The things I usually tell people, because I meet a lot of new investors at my events. Like one of the things I usually try to tell them to help out is, look, this is going to take a long time. There's going to be like some dark days. You're just going to go through house after house after house, and you're going to be doing this for a year, and you're not going to have found any deals. And this obviously not everybody. This is just what I tend to see, right? And it's going to be a year, and you still won't have had a deal, and you're going to be, completely frustrated. You're going to want to give up. You're going to be tired of just all of the rejection, and then you're going to find one that is like makes sense, and you're going to be so excited. You're going to be like, oh my god, like I finally got one, and the seller and da da da. And sometimes that one works out, but a lot of times that one is like we actually do an appraisal, and the numbers just don't come in, and the comps just aren't there, and it's just too risky, and they're probably going to lose money, and it's never a fun conversation. But it's like it does mean that you're making progress, because you got to the point where like you almost got one, and if you just stick with it for like a couple more months, the real one is probably like right there. And then for whatever reason, it's like now you're in the game, and so like everyone you've met along your journey, they know that you're for real, and they're going to start sending you more deals, and other investors will send you deals and that sort of thing. And so I usually just tell people, like, I'm like, look, if you're going to do this, just make sure you're going to stick with it until you actually do a deal. And then after that, decide what you want to do. But, it's tremendously discouraging. It's very hard, and that's why most people don't do it. I mean, I think that's most pursuits in business in general. It's really, really hard,
Yeah, you said you get a lot of newbies at your events. Is there certain characteristics of the people who then you see down the road who are being successful? Is there a certain tell that you can see?
Yeah, I would say, and this is one of the other things I kind of tell people, just because I guess I've seen it from the people that have been successful, is you want to focus your efforts. You want one mistake that a lot of new investors make is they choose too broad of an area, and so it's like people will come in, they'll be like, oh, I'll do anything in northern New Jersey. And you're like, dude, that's like 250 towns. It's way too much. Like, how are you going to identify an anomaly, in a town, something that's mispriced on the MLS or whatever, if you're operating 250 towns? It's like, pick one town, give it 6 months, and then add another one if you need to, So it's like people that are more kind of hyper-focused like that. I mean, in general, a lot of the people that you see that are successful, they're the kind of people that could easily be successful working for a large corporation or something like that. They tend to be more organized, they're more diligent. But even still, it's like, having just a few tips can really save you a lot of time and can kind of get you through some of the toughest patches of getting this type of business off the ground.
Do you have any mentors or people like that you go back to, that you look up to, or is it that you kind of took information from everything?
I mean, I generally kind of take information where I can find it, just people that seem interesting. I love hearing how people are building their businesses. And generally, that's one of the cool things about going to real estate networking events is that people are pretty giving with it. And they're like, if you're cool and you're like nice about it and respectful, you know, the 65-year-old real estate guru who's made millions of dollars and is just drinking a beer by the bar and like isn't even really looking to meet anybody, he just wants to hang out with his buddies. He will give you some of the best advice you've ever had in your life if you're just nice about it and you just respectfully ask and keep coming back and develop a relationship. And it's an interesting thing. I was having beers with a couple of real estate buddies a while back, and one of the guys was saying, he's a client of mine, and he was saying that he feels bad that he doesn't come to my event. And because I'll usually tell him, because he lives close to where I do one of the events, and sometimes he comes, but like, he said he always feels bad when he doesn't come. And I was like, dude, I don't give it a second thought that you don't come. If I happen to think of it, I'll tell you just because I like to hang out, but like, I don't care. And he's like, no. He's like, that's not why I feel bad. He's like, I feel bad because I used to be the person at that event that didn't know anything and had never done anything. And there were these older guys that took a liking to me and gals, and they kind of explained to me how it all worked. And like, they gave me, this life and this success that I've had and all that. He's like, and so as someone who's now successful, I feel like I owe it to the real estate community to go to these events and pay it forward. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, then I guess you should go to the events, but that's really cool that you feel that way. And the other thing, I know I'm going back now, but the other thing that I would tell people is you want to get your finances in order too. It's like, you don't want to be a lender and get a call from somebody that's like looking at all these deals and they've got $5,000 to put towards it. It's like, no, like you got to make sure you got the money angle of it lined up. It doesn't have to necessarily be your money, but you have to have other people that believe in you, that want to invest. You got to have some of that figured out. And to your question before about like, common threads of what's been successful, the people that really seem to take off like a rocket ship are the ones who are lining up those investors who always have, other money. So like what they'll do is they'll use someone like me to fund most of what they're doing. We'll fund maybe, 80, 90% of it, but then they've got that 10 to 20%. And so they're always using other people's money, and they always have another investor lined up. So basically they're spending their time not just looking for deals, but also meeting with investors, explaining what they're doing, why it makes sense, that sort of thing. So that's a huge part of it.
Biggest challenge you're facing in your business, and how are you tackling it?
The biggest challenge I'm facing in my business is just trying to figure out how to grow, and how to make the right moves so that, it's not wasted effort, just another lesson,
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like with my business, it's at a pretty good and stable spot right now where I could maybe not relax, but, just kind of coast a little bit. And so, then that's the choice. Is that what you're going to do, or are you going to continue to try to push and build? And so, I'm a push and build type person. And so then it's a question of, all right, who do we need to bring on? What's the strategy here? How are we going to train those people? How are we going to find the right people? What if they're not the right people? How are we going to get them out of there and get the right people in? And so it's, I don't know. It's mostly challenges around growth, which are good type challenges to have, but still challenges,
How many employees do you have?
2 full-time employees besides myself right now, but we're in the process of bringing on 3 new salespeople.
Can we walk through a deal?
Sure.
And like, hit upon how the points work, simple math, just so that we can just walk through it, really look at what this takes, and also like a reasonable timeline for how this works.
Sure. So I would usually say from initial phone call, discussing the deal, to closing, I typically say 2 to 3 weeks. It can be done in a week, but that's a stretch. Usually with repeat clients, usually about 2 weeks if they're really geared up and moving quickly, but 3 weeks if we haven't worked with them before. So usually the way that deal works, someone calls me with a deal, and we talk to the numbers, kind of like we said before, and we make sure the numbers make sense, right? And just to reiterate, so basically what I'm looking for generally is that it's something within reason of what they've done before, or it's not like, a huge rehab amount if they've never done it. If someone's brand new, we'll generally fund about 70% of the purchase, 100% of the rehab. And again, we don't want to exceed 75% of the end value. Actually, these days it's closer to 70% of the end value. And
so they need to bring in 30%, you're saying, for purchase price?
Of the purchase price, generally speaking, if it's their first deal. If they're super experienced or if they've done 5 or more, under normal circumstances, we'll go up to 90% of the purchase, 100% of rehab. These days, it's closer to 85, just because everyone's kind of worried about what's going on with the market. So basically, if the deal makes sense, then I'll say, okay, we like the deal. This is how much we think we can fund. We think we'll give you 70% of the purchase, or we'll give you 85% of the purchase, 100% of the rehab, something like that. And, the pricing will be, these days pricing's up. So, maybe it's 10.5%, 2 points or something like that. And then the other thing, we actually don't usually cover this just because I always typically do it the same way, but it is important from a real estate investor standpoint is how you're getting charged. So there's 2 ways to get charged interest. You can get charged full boat interest or as dispersed. So full boat meaning that you're being charged interest on the construction holdback, on the construction funds, even though you haven't gotten them yet. So that's full boat. And then as dispersed means that your monthly interest payments will go up as you draw down those funds. So you'd be surprised how few people ask about that, but it makes a huge difference in terms of your profitability and how much you're paying. So so then I'll kind of tell them the parameters, and then I'll say, does that work for you or not? And if it works for them, we say, okay, we move forward. And so then my team will order the appraisal, and if they need to close super quickly, we'll order a rush appraisal. And so then basically they provide a scope of work of what they plan to do to the property. They give that to the appraiser, and then based off that, the appraiser does an after rehab value appraisal, which is going to tell us what we think the future value will be once the work has been done. And so this is obviously in the case of they're doing like a fix and flip. If it's, a rental loan or something, it's obviously different. But, yep.
So let's do a few numbers just
sure.
So we can.
Easy numbers. Let's go easy numbers.
Easy numbers. And then easy numbers. The house costs $250.
Okay.
It's going to cost it's going to cost $250 to fix it.
Okay.
We think it can be sold for $750.
Okay.
So you're going to fund 100% of the $250 that needs to build it, correct?
Yep.
70% of the original $250, the other 30%, which is $75,000, I, being the first time investor, would have to bring, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, nitpicking here, but if it's a first time investor, probably wouldn't fund a rehab that large. But yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
Let's say I bring an incredible deal, so you're confident. And then you can sell it for $750, make that well over the 25%, actually. I think that's a 30% margin.
Okay.
So that would be a decent deal.
Yeah. I mean, that would be, it's tough, right? Because the numbers would be a little bit different. So, like, I would say, okay, it's your first deal, you're buying it for $250. you're putting 50 into it, and you're going to sell it for 475 or something like that, right? It's like, okay, cool. Sounds like a good deal. Without running the numbers, it sounds like it makes sense to me. The rehab amount sounds fine. And, so then, you're probably putting down 30% of the purchase on that one if it's your first deal. Now, so the one you were talking about, the 250 and 250, so let's say that's probably like an add a level or something like that, or some sort of an addition or a massive rehab. In that case, for us to even be funding it, something that large, you've probably done a few deals, and because you've probably done a few deals, we're probably funding 80-85%, something like that. Now, if you've gotten up to, and so here's the other thing, it depends on what you're doing, right? So like if it's just a large rehab, then, and we're funding 90% at the time, then, we might fund 90% of purchase and 100% of rehab. But if it's an add a level, well, that's kind of viewed as a little bit more complex. And so something like that, we'd probably max out at like 85%, or these days maybe 80% of purchase. So basically, we're not going to go to the same leverage on something that's viewed as being, definitely more complex. So, and it's the same thing. Then when you go to ground up, we fund less. Generally we max out at 80-85% of total cost. We're not going to go as high as we would on an add level, or an add level.
Yeah. So I'm curious, where can the listeners find you? Online and person.
Yeah, I mostly, like, most of the networking and stuff that I do is just through meetup.com. So I have Hudson County Flippers and Funders, New Jersey Flippers and Funders, NYC Flippers and Funders, Brooklyn Flippers and Funders, and Jersey Shore Flippers and Funders. So if any of the listeners operate in any of those areas, just join a group and come out and say hello.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for the interview today. We went over a lot of things, so thank you.
This is great, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice.
All right. Until next time.